My name is Trudy Coxe. I'm the host of Inside the Newport Mansions, and we have a wild guest this morning in David Norton Stone, who is
Wild.
an author, a teacher, and an attorney, and his story is just fascinating. David is a Rhode Island native, and in fact, visited the Newport Mansions just like many other Rhode Islanders have done during an elementary school field trip. And I'm so glad that you continue to remember that field trip. He is a graduate of Yale and and the University of Connecticut School of Law. He is the co-author of Images of Rhode Island, of America, Rhode Island Clam Shacks, and the author of Lost Restaurants of Providence. But his latest book is the book that we're going to be discussing, and it is called Newport is Burning: The Gilded Age Fires of Kate Jud. And in a moment, you're going to learn a lot about this arsonist, Kate Jud, who had a very big impact here in Newport. So before we get to Kate, let us talk a little bit, if we can, David, about how you stumbled upon this remarkable story and this incredible woman.
Yeah, well, it was quite by accident. I was working on a companion book to Lost Restaurants of Providence called Lost Restaurants of Newport, and was doing some research on the Ocean House Hotel, which had been up on Bellevue Avenue and was burned in kind of a spectacular blaze. But I was reading an obituary of Joseph Weaver, the owner of the hotel, and it mentioned how he had been plagued by fire in his lifetime. I think Kate Judd, by the way, is playing with us right now because she was very, as we'll talk about, she was very private and secretive. And I feel like I'm getting announcements now, which are being, sent by Kate Judd to stop our interview. I apologize greatly, but
Well, let us explain to those who are listening. David is in Florida right now, and where he lives is under a tornado watch. So we might hear announcements in the building that he's in that there is something that David should be doing to avoid the tornado. So apologies to everybody who's
don't
listening.
worry, an interview with the Newport Mansions comes first, always. But so in this obituary I'd found of Mr. Weaver, it mentioned that he'd been sort of jinxed or plagued by fires in his life because the Ocean House had burned twice, and he had also, his own personal residence had been burned to the ground by the notorious arsonist Kate Judd. And I thought, well, first of all, I've studied a lot of Newport history, uh, you know, uh, have been fascinated, as you mentioned, Trudy, by the Newport Mansion since I was in elementary school. I had been an intern at the Newport Historical Society and gave tours at the Wanton Lyman Hazard House and the Quaker Meeting House. But I had never heard about a notorious Rhode Island arsonist called Kate Judd. So, I just jotted it down on an index card to kind of come back to someday, but it kept kind of haunting me. So I kept I sort of temporarily lost my focus on Lost Restaurants of Newport and was looking into this arsonist. And the story was just utterly fascinating because she was a huge celebrity in her day in the way that I guess a criminal can become a well-known person. But just she was sentenced to an incredibly long term of 25 years for this arson in Newport. And this had followed a number of other arsons in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And I think during that long prison term, she just became forgotten. She was pardoned by the governor, or her sentence was commuted in 1904, 2 years, little bit 2 years early. But at that point, she willfully disappeared from the public eye. She was whisked away by the Sisters of Mercy and never heard from again. The Sisters of Mercy, who I believe run Salve Regina
Yeah.
University.
So let's go back to her first initiative in Newport. There is a fire in 1883 at the Weaver House on Bellevue Avenue. Can you define exactly where that might have
Yeah,
been?
so in Newport Mansions terms, across the street from King's Coat. Um, so I suppose going south on Bellevue Avenue, it would have been um, if you know where the Stop and Shop is on the
Yeah.
left, that's where the Ocean House Hotel had always been, and Weaver owned that hotel, and his own villa was just south of there.
So did she start the fire in the hotel or in the Weaver House?
So she had this happened in the winter, January 23rd of 1883, and the fire was the family had moved over to this cottage, so they didn't live in the hotel in the winter. They moved to the cottage for the winter, and then in the summer they moved to the hotel and rented out this villa, which was quite beautiful, in a spectacular location, right next to the hotel. And so she had been hired in January in the winter by the family as a cook. And she literally was on the run from detectives in Boston at the time, who, if they had just gotten to her a day or two earlier, could have prevented this whole disaster. But they hired her, and she had not been there more than a few days when she um, burned the house to the ground.
Hmm.
And you might be asking, well, why? Why would somebody do such a thing? But her modus was to go get a job in a great house, steal from the family, mostly clothing and jewelry, and then burn down the house to hide the evidence of her crimes. But in none of her other previous crimes had she started doing it so quickly. I mean, she had only been with the Weavers a few days.
Hmm.
And miraculously, one of the few things to survive the fire was Kate Judd's trunk, which she had managed to push out onto a roof and was rescued by someone in the course of the fire. And it would later be found that it was filled with, stolen jewels and clothing.
Wow. Let's go back a little bit. Where does Kate Judd come from, and what kind of background did she emerge from, and how did she? And I know you're going to talk about a number of fires that she started before coming to the Weaver House. So let's learn a little bit about her earlier years.
Yeah. Well, her earliest years are an utter mystery. She sort of appears in New Hampshire at age 16, working for a gentleman named Mr. Aiken there in Franklin Falls, New Hampshire. And before that, we really don't know anything because she lied so much about her background. She claimed that she came from a respectable family, and she did not want to say her real name or divulge anything about her background because she didn't want to bring shame to her family. So that was her official story about that. But at various times, she said that she came from Ireland or came from Canada. And it's possible both were true because some people did, enter the United States, through Canada from Ireland. Um, but she appears to have been very well spoken, very well educated, um, you know, um, very ladylike. I mean, anyone who hired her would, that was sort of like their memory of her. But I would suspect that she did come from in either an Irish or a French Canadian background via Canada, ultimately, because those are the sort of, Canada does seem to be a nexus in most of her stories. And even geographically, the fact that she first sort of arises in New Hampshire would sort of explain that. So
Yeah.
she was a young
And
girl.
did
Yeah.
she go on? I think she spent some time in jail. So she
Yeah.
not she never married. She never had children. She didn't.
Ooh. Yeah, so she started working in at the Aiken House when she was about 16.
And
And
the Aiken House is in New Hampshire.
it was in New Hampshire, right? Like
Yeah.
most of the places she lived, it burned to the ground. Uh, but and actually, Mr. Aiken himself was quite interesting. He's the gentleman who built the cog railway up to the top of Mount Washington.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
We've all done that.
yeah, exactly, right. And I think he built the observatory up there, and so was very involved with, the development of Mount Washington
So
area.
she was working for a distinguished, well-known
Yes,
leader in the community. He must
that's
have
right.
been a superstar.
Exactly, right. And the home was beautiful. And I did finally find um, a drawing of it in it's in the collection of Historic New England, and it's reproduced in the book. But it was,
Mhm.
a lovely kind of Downing style Italianate villa. And she was not, so it burned to the ground, and she stayed working with the family for a while afterwards, and then left and was hired in Massachusetts. She was
But
never
they did
connected
not
to that
know it.
fire.
Excuse me. They did not know that she was the person who started the fire. They never figured that out.
Absolutely not. No.
And how did the information about her being the person who started the fire get discovered?
Right. Well, at her next place of employment in Massachusetts, she mentioned a few times to the lady of the house that the place that she previously lived had burned down mysteriously. And this was after a few of mysterious fires in that house that she was now working in. Um, there was one of the first weeks she was there. She claimed that an ash had gotten in her broom and started a little fire in a closet, when that fire was discovered. And there were a couple of other minor fires there. And meanwhile, Mrs. Stanwood had also noticed how fine Kate Judd's clothes were. She had these beautiful gowns and, things that a person of her station would not normally have. And she would always claim that she was a great favorite of Reverend Aiken and, would give these cast off, clothing items to her.
Wow. So she stole from the Aiken family,
Yes.
ends up going south to and okay, so did this well, no, let's go back to the Aikens. So this house burns down. She continues to work for the family, however.
Right.
And
Uh,
what motivated her to leave the Aikens and move southward?
I'm not sure. I think she did go through a very reputable agency because the Stanwards were quite careful. They went to a Boston agency to look for a new cook. And she was said to have, the finest references from, this substantial citizen, Mr. Aiken from New Hampshire. Um, so in terms of you know, why she left, I'm not sure, other than, maybe she'd already accomplished what she wanted to there, was maybe she couldn't wear these clothes, right? They would have been recognized. So,
That's right.
if she needed, she needed to go to another state so she could, enjoy her plunder. But but eventually these mysterious fires began to really concern the Stanwoods, but they never suspected Kate, um, which is
And
super
where are the
curious.
Stanwoods? Where are we now?
We're in northern Massachusetts. I think it was Amesbury.
Oh,
Um,
Amesbury. Okay.
okay.
And are the Stanwoods a reputable, upstanding family in the area?
Oh, yes, yes. They have also, a lot of, an old colonial house that's been, added on to, but, very substantial house in the community. And he was a retired businessman, very, very well respected. And, but it seems like they lived fairly modestly. I think they had one other hired employee, and he was a gentleman who lived in the shed. And it seems that Kate took a real dislike to the man in the shed because where she really um, where things really started to go south for her there was she lit the shed on fire and it nearly killed this man. And obviously he didn't, he may have been a suspect in the other fires, but at this point they turned to the only other possible suspect, which was Kate. And she, in the middle of the night, a mysterious telegram arrived saying that, Kate needed to go home. Her father was ill, and she left. But shortly after she left, the Stanwoods discovered all the missing stolen items from their house.
Oh my.
and
Oh
hired
my.
detectives to try to find her, which they did. And she was arrested and served 5 years in jail at that point.
Oh my Lord. So
Yeah.
she gets away, and she did not accomplish her maybe original goal, though, of setting the whole house on fire. She set
Right. That one,
small
right.
fires in the Stanwood house, but the whole house was still standing by the
Right, right.
time.
And it's a miraculous in a way that it didn't set on fire, because when you hear about some of the other attempts, like they found kerosene leaking from the attic, and a fire had kind of in some rags that had been lit on fire. But who knows if maybe sometime she would change her mind, or because it seemed like she certainly knew how to set a house on fire. So yeah, these sort of failed attempts in Massachusetts are odd.
Yeah. So she goes to jail, or she's sentenced to jail for five
Yes.
years. Did she serve the 5 years?
She did, and almost immediately became cook for the for the family that for the warden of the jail.
Oh
So
my.
it's so odd that they would put her again in a place where she'd have access to fire.
But
Um,
she was arrested for being an arsonist.
yeah,
So the sheriff or the knew that by putting her in charge of the fire, he was really kind of going contrary
yeah.
to common sense.
It was either an incredible belief in the power of reform, or or just stupidity. But actually, she never it appears that she was the model prisoner there. Found religion. It seems like people truly believe that she'd been rehabilitated after that 5 year stint, and unbelievably, she was then hired to be a domestic in another house right away after she was released from jail.
And so was that up in near the
That was
prison?
in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So she managed to put some distance, between herself and the jail she had come from, and she had a really glowing reference from a reverend who had been, befriended her in jail. So she got hired at this other house, and mysterious things started happening there. Keys disappeared. Um, um, she moved out, she quit, and then there was a fire there. And they realized that she had kept the key and come back in, and started the fire and stolen, more clothes and expensive things.
Oh my heavens. Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you earlier. Did she ever marry and have children?
Oh, so no, during this period, she was always single. In fact, when we finally get to Newport, she does have a boyfriend she breaks out of jail with. But there's a rumor that there are rumors she may have had a baby in jail later on in life. But no, as far as we know, she never was married or had children.
Okay, so she is working, she gets another job, and she in the Lawrenceville area. How does she, is her next stop Newport? And how
Uh,
does she get to Newport?
So her next stop is Boston.
Okay.
And meanwhile, detectives are the people in Lawrence, Massachusetts have hired a detective agency, and they're on the hunt for her, um, and are just about to arrest her when she disappears, and they don't know where she's gone. And where she has gone is Newport in
Hmm.
January. So you would think not a great place to find a job in January, but she apparently found a job right away with the Weaver family. But in the meantime, don't forget these detectives are, they know she's an arsonist. They know, she's probably going to do the same thing somewhere else. So they're really frantically trying to find out what city she landed in. And they do find out that it's Newport, but we'll catch up to that point later.
Okay, and then I want to go back. I'm sorry to be going
Yeah.
forward and back, but you said that she broke out of jail with her boyfriend. Was that the jail in Lawrence?
No, in
Or,
Lawrence, she was the model prisoner, served her
okay.
term, but maybe she decided at that point, I'm never going to jail again, because when she got jailed in Newport, that's where she managed to escape in quite a dramatic manner. So
Okay, well,
I mean,
I don't want to hear that
yeah,
story before. She
okay,
arrives in Newport, and
Right.
she is hired by, I have to do it sequentially. She is
Okay.
hired by the Weaver family, the family that built the Ocean House, which was the glorious hotel across from Kingscote, just to orient people who are listening. And tell us tell us a little bit of that story. And one of the people in my office, Bill Tavares, who you have dealt with, did make an interesting observation that when the breakers burned down,
Mm,
he made a very conscious decision to separate the burners from the house. And
yes.
when Ocean House burned down in 1845, that was before Judd, that had nothing to do
Hmm.
with arson. The kitchen was separated from the house, probably deliberately from the hotel. So,
Right.
this theme of keeping fire away from where people are living or people are staying in a hotel was sort of a theme. And along comes the arsonist.
That's right.
Yeah,
Well, and Bill had brought up an interesting question if possibly kitchens were starting to be built separate from the main house for fear of something like arson. And I'm not sure if that was true in the North, but I definitely have heard that mentioned in Charleston, South Carolina. I was on a tour of the Battery there, and they pointed out how the kitchen was always separate from the main house. And the reason given was they were afraid that maybe a disgruntled enslaved person, would start a fire if the kitchen were in the main house that could quickly, destroy the whole house. So certainly in the South, that was on people's mind, maybe not so much in the North
right.
until after
Okay.
Kate.
So she comes to Newport in the 1880s, is it?
Yes, 1883.
Okay. And what's happening in Newport and the Gilded Age sort of broadly during that period of
Yeah,
time?
well, this really fascinated me because, I'm a huge fan of the Gilded Age TV show on HBO, and much of the first couple of seasons that is around this period. Alva Vanderbilt is planning her great ball at her new mansion on Fifth Avenue right at this time. As a matter of fact,
That's true.
as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, in March 1883, just as Kate was being sentenced to jail for 25 years, um, that was the same week that Alva had her ball. So I
Uh-huh.
loved the contrast of that. And part of me wondered, there was, this was also a peak time for these new illustrated magazines like Frank Leslie's and Harper's, for the first time ordinary people could see how the 400 dressed. And part of me wondered if this was another inducement for Kate to steal these gowns. She wanted to look like the people she was seeing in the magazines.
Well, it
But
might have been an inducement for her to head to Newport too, where
yes,
she would
exactly.
be mingling. If she were smart, she would be mingling with the Alva Vanderbilts of the world.
Absolutely, yes. So this 1883 was also when the new Opera House opened in New York, the new Metropolitan Opera House, and and Bill Tavares from your staff, he had mentioned that Krakatoa, the great volcano, had its last eruption in that year as well. Not so much Gilded Age, but that's sort of a fiery coincidence that
Yes,
happened with
yes,
Kate Jud, but yeah, if you've been watching the Gilded Age, this was the period when Kate Judd was active, and it's interesting because that show does have its backstage, its downstairs characters as well. But
right.
I don't think anybody in that show has done anything quite as horrendous as
This is
Kate.
a story I think that Julian Fellows missed, but he shouldn't have missed.
Absolutely, yes.
We'll have to somehow wake him up to the fact that there was this incredible Kate Judd that he might want to work into his storyline. But
Love it.
okay, so
That's great.
she is working at the Ocean House. She's working for the Weaver family. What happens?
So she hasn't been there long when the family goes to Boston for the day. And um, there's that must have been the day when she stole mostly from the daughters of the Weavers, Hannah and Susan, and filled her trunks because the family got back that evening, and that's when the fire occurred. So they woke up at around 5 in the morning, and there was, one of the daughters smelled smoke coming through the register, woke up the family, managed to get everybody out of the house, but it was said to be the coldest day of the year. So imagine, running out of the house, in below zero temperatures, and the house just, immediately catching fire. Um, I guess it's sort of interesting that this fire was so successful. She started it in the basement right near the furnace, so it would look like possibly, something that, just happened naturally. And because of the construction of a lot of these wooden houses, I'm sure you'd understand this a lot better than I do, but apparently there was, I think they called it a balloon frame, where there was like a wooden exterior wall and then wooden framing inside and then a gap in between. So a fire could very quickly, go right
Right.
from the basement up to the third floor and, and destroy the house within, an hour or so. So that's exactly what happened there. And very likely, no one
And
would
was
ever
she
have
living
been.
in the house with
She
them?
was living in the house on the
So
third
she
floor.
has escaped along with the family out onto the street,
Yes.
feigning concern and sorrow about the loss of the house.
Yes, right.
Oh boy.
And meanwhile, probably, and also, manages to put her trunk on the roof and has someone bring that over to, there were two cottages there. One, another of the Weaver sons had a cottage just, I guess it would have been east of the Weaver cottage, right at the corner of Bellevue. So they brought the family and some of whatever could be saved over there. But meanwhile, there was a lot of drama going on with the fire department because, first of all, it was so cold, and the water from the hoses was turning to ice.
Oh my. Hmm.
And, sort of like in California recently, I guess things didn't all quite work as they were expected to. And some sort of automatic alarm system that was supposed to have some in the fire department didn't work. But eventually it became, an all bells type of situation. And the fire department did its best, but at the end, there was nothing left except the doorway on
Oh
Bellevue
my.
Avenue, but covered with ice where it looked like this big, icy gate. And apparently it was like a tourist attraction in Newport for weeks afterward, where people would come and see this strange creation of ice and fire. Uh,
Hmm.
and you might wonder, were there any casualties? And there, a couple of the firemen I did see had minor injuries and went to the hospital. But Susan Weaver had a dog at one point jumped out of her arms. She rescued the dog while she was waking up the rest of the family, and the dog ran from her arms into the fire and wasn't
Oh.
saved. Um, and there were some other heroic escapades. Mr. Weaver had a son who had passed away, and there was a portrait of him in the house. And someone, just a concerned citizen, ran into the house to try and save the portrait and succeeded.
Oh boy.
Somewhere that portrait probably exists still. It was said to be badly smoked, but salvageable.
Is that portrait around somewhere today, I
I have
wonder?
not, it must be in the Weaver family somewhere, but I haven't seen any reference to it anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so the fire occurs and she how
Yeah.
so she's got a record. I guess they
Right, right.
go to her immediately, or she
Yeah,
comes to
so
mind immediately.
those detectives in Boston, they are on the way to Newport with a warrant on the train the day after the fire or the morning
Wow.
of the fire. And they actually see a newspaper account of the fire somewhere where they stop on the way. And they just know it's Kate Judd. So the minute they get to Newport, they go to the police. They find Kate Judd at the other Weaver son's house. They check her bags, and it's full of all of this stolen, the stolen clothing and jewelry. And she's actually wearing a dress. So the man that had hired the detectives in Massachusetts came with the detectives that day, and Kate was wearing a dress stolen from this man's wife at the time.
Oh my.
So they were immediately able to connect her to the crimes in Massachusetts and definitively to the fire in Newport. So then this became a huge story because it, was arson, intentional. And Kate was taken to the Newport jail, which is now the Jailhouse Inn, if you know that, down in
Right.
the
Yeah.
center of town. And so that's where she was imprisoned at that point.
And I think I read a note somewhere that the courthouse, when she was being sentenced, tell us about the courthouse drama.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess I saw in the Newport Mercury that people would say not much is happening in Newport in January, but this year, everybody is totally transfixed by this case. So I think this woke up normally a very sleepy winter Newport, and she escaped from jail fairly quickly. And her method, before we get to the men at the courthouse, we have to understand the hysteria that built, because she escaped from that jail within a few days of going there. And she dug a hole in her cell down to a basement stairwell. And apparently it was a very, very small hole. And the rumor was that she had to remove her clothes in order to get through the hole. So this also, I think, led to this mystique and curiosity about her. And she was said to be very attractive. And she was young. At this point, she was probably 24. And so she escaped by getting into the stairwell, climbing back up the stairs, stealing the keys from the sleeping jailer, and she let out another prisoner named George Rounds, who was about 18 and supposedly quite handsome. So they apparently had formed some sort of alliance in the jail and broke out together. And he was a Newport native, and he had a lot of connections and a lot of knowledge. And they went and hid in a barn, curiously, right behind the Ocean House, a barn over there that had some connection with his family, or nearby his family. And they managed to hide there for a few weeks until someone turned them in. And when they were rearrested, that's when there was this huge interest of the citizenry, to see this incendiary. They had all these great nicknames for her, the Newport Firebug, things like that. So when she finally did go to court, the courthouse was just the streets and the courthouse were just thronged with people wanting to get a glimpse at her. And I'm sure there were people there who also were fascinated by her, but also I'm sure there were many people just as angry and thought she was a horrible criminal and needed to be punished. But the sense I got was that, especially in the national news, because this story was reported on everywhere. There was always this fascination with her supposed beauty.
Well, there you write somewhere in your book, Kate Judd, one of the best looking, most modest appearing, and altogether seductive but desperate and ingeniously wicked young women ever sent to prison, has once more broken jail. I think that
Yes,
describes the contradictions of this woman as well. I
right.
mean, it's just an incredible story. Okay, so she is sentenced to what? What does she get?
20. So there's never really a trial because she confesses. Um,
Oh,
she confesses. So that's how we definitively know that she burned the Aiken house in Franklin Falls, New Hampshire, and set the other fires that she was suspected of. And there may very well have been others, because we don't know much about her before she arrived in New Hampshire. So there could have been others before then. But um, she confesses and is sentenced to 25 years, which was the longest prison term, I believe, for a woman in Rhode Island history at that point.
wow.
Yeah. So even people, maybe ordinary people were fascinated by her, but certainly, um, the courts were not, going to let her get away with this. And it's curious because no one was killed in any of her fires, and it was said that murderers were treated more leniently than she was. But there was a lot of fear in Newport that this could be, uh, someone, there could be a copycat, or this might put ideas in people's heads. So I think there was an idea, definitely a need to throw the book at her.
And so she gets a 25-year sentence. Does she serve the 20? And where is she held?
Right. So she was moved to Providence. Um, and it was difficult because they did not have a prison for women at the time. So they always had to make sort of separate accommodations for her. Um, but yeah, she was imprisoned in Providence, and then there's something that was called the State Farm that I think was sort of like a combination asylum slash prison. She was moved there from like kind of the central prison at a certain point. But even there, they had to make a lot of special arrangements because it was known that she was an escape risk. And in fact, she did escape again rather spectacularly in 1885. And it required the help of numerous people, which is what's so curious because every night she would be bolted in her cell. She wouldn't eat dinner with the other inmates. She'd eat dinner in her cell. They would take away her clothes so she couldn't escape. She would just have her night clothes on, bolt her in, and then, they wouldn't take her out to the next day. But somehow or other, somebody unbolted the cell for her. And somehow or other, she managed to get the keys to get outside to the courtyard, where she used, like a little bit of a wooden planking that led to the outhouses as a ladder to get over the wall. And then she had a rope that was tied to a stick that she propped in the wall to get her over the other side, and then was met by an accomplice who took her away. And she managed to stay, and of course, this made national news again. Kate Judd, escapes prison again. No prison in the country can hold her. These were some of the headlines. But she was found just sort of wandering the streets like a couple weeks later. So whoever had been helping her had clearly abandoned her at that point. And there
I
were a couple.
wonder how she made that association with somebody who was so loyal to her and so agreeable in helping her. Now, who was Bernard Keenan?
Okay, so at once she'd been in jail for a very long time, there had been a lot of people started to think she was treated unfairly. Partially, this was because people would go visit the prison was open to the public apparently, and people would go there on
Hmm.
Sunday and like stroll through, and they would see Kate Judd gardening, and people knew who she was, and they really felt like she was reformed.
She
And
was the tourist attraction of Providence.
yes, right. And so people started, especially women involved with certain church groups, were starting to petition for her release, that she'd served, enough time already. And I think uh, don't forget, um, Lizzie Borden had not yet, you know, well, when Lizzie Borden burned, it had her trial. I'm sorry, her murder trial. People couldn't believe then a woman could do it, and I think people thought maybe there was more to Kate Judd's story as well. So Bernard Keenan was a lawyer who took an interest. Not a lawyer, actually. He was um, all but a lawyer. He took an interest in her case, and he was from Pawtucket. He was a barber, but he was also in the way people in local politics could be very, smaller names could be more powerful than the governor. I think he was one of those people. He was the head of the Board of Licenses in Pawtucket. So, and wielded a lot of power, and um, and I think he was Catholic and may have been approached by the Sisters of Mercy at the prison in Providence as well to look at her case. So he started a campaign to get her released from jail. And the story was spun, because don't forget, this is like 23 years afterwards. And it's not like today where every story, remains on the internet to be found instantly. And all of a sudden you start hearing that she'd had some kind of dispute with Mr. Weaver, where maybe it was justified for her to start this fire. Anyway, he sort of, I think, spun the wheel so that Kate looked, either innocent or possibly
Beleaguered.
insane or completely rehabilitated. And eventually the governor did commute her sentence, so she didn't have to serve the last couple years.
She served 21 out of the
Right,
25. Is that
right.
right? And I wonder, did she keep her relationship with well, you don't know. That's the interesting part of the story, I guess, David, in that from the time that she gets out of jail in Providence after 21 years, it seems like she does disappear. Is that what happens?
Yes, right. So, the Sisters of Mercy, who she had helped a lot at the asylum, you know, and and I think she had also become quite religious, or at least apparently, they helped her to disappear. And there was a wonderful interview she did with the Boston Globe on the day of her release, where she again said that she would never reveal her real name. She was not going to say where she was going, and she just simply disappeared. And they wanted to take her photograph, and she was adamant, no, no, no photographs. She masterminded her disappearance and really was never heard from again. And curiously, I wrote to the Sisters of Mercy trying to find, records, and they replied that the records from Rhode Island had either been lost in a flood or burned. They couldn't remember which, but were no
Oh
longer
my.
available. So that was another dead end there. So the only I can't think of a possible way to really track her down other than if she maybe did tell family member or people who might have kept the story all these years. But
Fascinating. And um, some of the items that she dug out of
yeah, so
are
she
still available. And where can people go and see
oh
some of
well.
Kate Judd's things?
Yeah, well, apparently the Attorney General's office for many years kept, she had used to dig out of that Newport jail, like a bottom of piece of her bed, like that maybe twisted off, and a spoon. And that was in the Attorney General's office on display for many, many years, but has disappeared. So I'm hoping to be able to
Oh
locate
boy.
that, and
Yeah.
maybe the Newport Mansions could join the search, because I think that'd be a wonderful artifact of this Gilded Age story.
This is a fascinating story. Um, I have seen and read parts of David's book. I encourage anyone who is fascinated with this story to pick up a copy. Tell us where people can get a copy of your book, David.
Sure. Really, at any bookstore, they can order it for you. I don't know if they'd be in stock, but also Amazon.com is probably a very, easy place to get it. But I encourage you to go to your independent bookstore like Charter Books in Newport
Right.
and
Yeah.
ask them. They know how to find me. So
And the book is called Newport is Burning: The Gilded Age Fires of Kate Judd. And just as a reminder, the author is David Norton Stone. And this has been a fascinating time with you. I really appreciate. I hope you're okay with your storms down in Florida. But
things seem to
uh,
have calmed down here. So yes, thank
thank
you.
you,
I've really enjoyed it, Trudy. Thank
thank
you.
you so much, David. And I hope when you come next to Newport, you will stop by and see us.
Will do. Absolutely.
Thank you.